She fed the lonely old man until the mafia boss walked in with 4 men and called him father. The harbor in Grit isn't a place for nice things. It lives on the edge of Rust Harbor, smelling of stale coffee, old grease, and the metallic tang of the shipyard. The windows are permanently fogged with salt spray, blurring the lights of the cranes moving in the dark. The floor is always a little sticky. I fit right in here. I'm Lena Hart. Small, quiet, easy to miss. I'm the one who scrubs the grout, refills the tiny sugars, and mops up the floor when the fishermen track in mud. And I am the one who feeds Mr. Ira. He appears every night at 6, just as the shipyard whistles die and the daylight bleeds out of the sky. He always takes the corner booth, the one by the window that rattles in its frame when the container trucks go by. His hands shake. It's not a violent tremor, just a persistent, weary tremble that makes holding a spoon a war he always loses. The first time I saw him spill the hot chowder down the front of his thin, frayed shirt, I didn't laugh like the 2 truckers at the counter. I just got a fresh bowl. I paid for it myself. Out of my tips. I've paid for it every night since. Evening, Mr. Ira, I'd say, sliding into the vinyl seat across from him. The vinyl is cracked, cold against my legs. He'd just nod, his eyes cloudy behind thick glasses that were always smudged. He smells like the sea, old wool, and something faintly medicinal. He's thin, so thin, a bird that forgot how to fly south, his skin pale and papery over his sharp cheekbones. Chowder again? A wet, rattling cough was his yes. It shook his whole small frame, and I'd pretend not to notice the fear in his eyes when it passed. He wouldn't eat unless I sat with him. Not one bite. He'd just stare out of the window at the harbor, as if waiting for a ship that was never coming in. So I'd slide in, pushing a paper napkin under his chin. I'd pick up the heavy diner spoon, dip it in the thick white soup, blow on it gently, and lift it to his lips. He'd gum it, swallow, and then, sometimes, he'd talk. His voice was a rasp, a low rumble full of salt spray and gravel. He'd talk about ships as long as a lifetime, hulls painted in colors I'd never seen. He'd talk about the way the wind smells different 5 miles out, cleaner. He'd talk about shadows on the docks and men who carried their own luck like a weapon. His eyes were bad, but he saw things I didn't. He was my nightly charity. My one small act of defiance against a world that was all sharp edges and cold water. Tonight, the rain was coming down hard, a real Baltimore storm, angry and cold, turning the harbor black and hostile. The diner was half full, the air thick with the sound of sizzling burgers, low conversation, and the clatter of plates. Then the door slammed open. It didn't just open, it was thrown back against the wall so hard the little bell above it choked. A single, strangled ding. The rain and the cold rushed in first, a physical presence, swirling leaves and trash onto the mat. Then the men, 5 of them. 4 were just shapes in long, dark coats, built wide and solid like the pylons holding up the pier. They fanned out the second they cleared the door. One by the counter, one by the jukebox, his hand resting near the glass, 2 moving toward the center. They moved without talking, their eyes sweeping the room, dead and flat. They were walls that could walk. But the one in the middle, he was different. He was maybe 34, and he moved like the world was supposed to get out of his way. It did. The chatter in the diner didn't just quiet down, it died. It was sucked out of the room, vacuum sealed. Cletus at the grill, froze with his spatula hovering over a row of onions. The 2 truckers at the counter put their forks down, very slowly. The man didn't look at the menu board. He didn't look at Cletus. He didn't even shrug the rain from his shoulders. His eyes, the color of damp, cold metal, scanned the room once. They passed over the truckers, the tired waitress on break, and then they locked. First on the old man in the booth, then on me. On the spoon I was holding, frozen, halfway to Mr. Ira's mouth. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The 4 men had moved too. They weren't surrounding us. Not exactly. They were just standing, occupying the space. They had built an invisible room around our table just by existing. The air pressure dropped. I could feel it in my ears, a dull throb. The man in the center took a step forward. He wore an expensive dark suit under the coat, tailored perfectly. He stopped at the edge of the checkered linoleum, his shoes wet but immaculate. He looked only at Mr. Ira. His face was sharp, handsome in a way that hurt, all hard angles and no softness. The silence stretched. It was so quiet I could hear the buzz of the neon sign outside, the frantic tap, tap, tap of the rain against the glass. Then he spoke. One word. Father. It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was just heavy. It landed on the table and skidded. The cheap ceramic coffee cup in my other hand started to shake. A dark ripple moved across the black surface. I put it down on the formica, my own hand trembling so badly I almost missed. Father. My mind raced, trying to connect dots that were never meant to touch. Mr. Ira Morello. The stories the old dockworkers told, the whispers, the rumors. The king of the harbor who vanished 10 years ago. Some said he was dead, betrayed by his own. Some said he just walked into the fog and never came back. No one said he was sitting in the Harbor and Grit diner, being spoon-fed clam chowder by a waitress who barely made rent. I wasn't just feeding an old man. I was feeding a ghost, a legend. I was feeding the lost father of the city's new harbor boss. The man, Cashin Morello, moved. Oh, he didn't ask. He just grabbed the back of the chair from the next table, slid it across the floor. The sound was a scratch on my nerves, and sat down opposite his father, opposite us. He didn't touch me, and he didn't touch Ira, but the sheer weight of him, the power coming off him in waves, made the salt and pepper shakers clink together. The porcelain plates on the tables nearby seemed to vibrate. Ira didn't look scared. He just looked tired. So tired. He turned his hazy eyes from his son and gave me a pale, weak smile. This girl, he rasped, his voice sounding thin and small in the heavy silence. She feeds me every night. She's the reason I still come here. The gray eyes snapped back to me. They weren't just metal anymore. They were analytical. They were sizing me up, weighing me, deciding what I was. A threat, a tool, a loose end. Your name, he said. It wasn't a question. It was a command. Lena, I whispered. My voice was dry, sticking to my throat. Lena Hart. I watched his eyes. It was the smallest change, a fractional shift. His gaze softened by maybe half a degree. It wasn't warmth. It was just less cold. The kind of softness you only recognize when you've seen true brutality. The kind of quiet only a predator knows how to use. He nodded once. Then he looked back at the soup bowl, which was still half full. A new kind of meal began. The most silent meal the Harbor and Grit had ever seen. There was no talking. There was no clatter of silverware from the other tables. There was only the sound of the rain lashing the glass, the scrape of my spoon against the cheap bowl as I dipped it, and the heavy, unsaid weight of secrets older than the docks themselves, all mixing together, waiting for a spark. I continued to feed him, one spoonful at a time. The silence in the diner was so thick it felt like another presence at the table. Cassian Morello just watched, his gray eyes missing nothing. He watched the way my hand was steady and the way his father's wasn't. He watched the way I wiped a small dribble of chowder from Ira's chin with a paper napkin. Finally, the bowl was empty. I placed the spoon down, my hand aching from the tension of holding it so still. Cashin's voice cut through the quiet. Why? I looked at him, confused. Why what? Why feed him? His gaze was intense, dissecting. You don't know him. He's a stranger. I thought about my brother, Leo, and the stack of medical bills on my kitchen table. I thought about the double shifts and the ache in my feet that never really went away. I looked back at the man who had just paid for his meal with a kindness he didn't even know he possessed. Because it was the only kindness I could afford, I said, my voice low but clear. Cashin's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes flickered, A moment of calculation. He hadn't expected that answer. "Mister?" Ira, startled by the sound of his son's voice, fumbled for his water glass. His trembling hand knocked his spoon. It clattered off the table and hit the linoleum with a dull, final clink. Ira flinched, a look of shame crossing his features. I bent to pick it up, but another hand got there first. Cassian. He had moved so fast I didn't even see him lean. He picked up the spoon, not by the handle, but by the bowl, his long fingers closing around it. He sat back up, holding it, and I saw it. His hand was shaking. It wasn't a tremor like his father's. It wasn't weakness. It was a deep, resonant vibration, a tremor that came from somewhere inside him, from memory and a rage so old it had turned to steel. He stared at the spoon for a long second, as if it were a weapon. Then, with a controlled, deliberate motion, he signaled over his shoulder without looking. One of the men, the one by the jukebox, the one with a scar that cut through his left eyebrow, instantly walked to the counter, grabbed a fresh spoon wrapped in a napkin, and brought it back. He placed it on the table. Cassian never took his eyes off me. He didn't give the new spoon to his father. He just let the old one fall from his grip onto the table, next to the plate. The sound was loud in the silence. I noticed the 4 men again. They hadn't moved. Tomas, Riggs, Juno, Vale. I didn't know their names then, but I learned them. They stood like statues, dark and unmoving, but their eyes were alive. They weren't looking at us. They were looking at the windows, at the reflections, watching the street, the door, every angle. They were watching for a world I didn't know existed. "He is Ira Morello," Cassian said, his voice flat, like he was reading a weather report. He was the king of these docks. Every crate that moved, every ship that docked, paid him tribute. I swallowed. The harbor boss? The rumors were true. The rumors, Cassian continued, as if reading my mind, said he was killed, betrayed by his own. That was a useful lie. My blood ran cold. A useful lie. The implications of that settled on me. Heavy as an anchor chain. I was in the middle of something I couldn't even name. I started to stammer, pushing back against the booth. "Look, I don't know anything about that. I just work here. I work 2 shifts, most days. I have to pay my brother's medical bills. He has asthma, the bad kind. I don't want any trouble." Cassian's gaze hardened, pinning me to the vinyl seat. "You had trouble the moment you put that spoon in his hand." His voice was soft, but it held no comfort. It wasn't just a warning. It was a statement of fact. It was a promise. It meant my life, as I knew it, was over. Mr. Ira, who'd been silent, suddenly reached out. His trembling, papery hand landed on my forearm. His grip was surprisingly strong. "She's my anchor, Cassian," he rasped, his eyes clearer than I'd seen them in weeks. He was looking at his son. "You will respect her." Cassian's jaw tightened. He looked at his father's hand on my arm. The word respect hung in the air, tasting of gunpowder. I knew, instinctively, that in Cassian Morello's world, respect meant protection. And protection meant ownership. It meant being pulled into the very center of the storm. "She's the only one who saw a man," Ira whispered, "and not a ghost." The moment was broken by a sound from outside. A heavy-duty pickup truck, one of the big ones from the shipyard, laid on its horn. A long, angry blare as it tore down the alleyway beside the diner. It was too fast, too loud for the rain. The man with the scar, Juno, instantly leaned in toward Cassian, his back to us, shielding his mouth. He spoke in a whisper so low I shouldn't have heard it, but the tension amplified everything. "Spectre wire," he murmured. "It just swept a ghost phone. Local, within 20 yards. A ghost phone. Spectre wire. The words were alien, terrifying. Cassian didn't react, but his whole body went still. He pushed his chair back, the legs scraping loudly. He stood up. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, thick wad of cash, dropping it on the table. It was more money than I made in a week. It landed silently next to his father's plate. His gray eyes found mine again. He tilted his head. "Let us take you home, Lena." The us included the 4 men who looked like they ate trouble for breakfast. It included the man who shook with memory and spoke of useful lies. I shook my head, my throat tight. "No, thank you. I can get home. My car is just out back." I slid out of the booth, grabbing my thin jacket from the hook. I needed to run. I needed air, even if it was just the cold, wet air of the storm. "I said," he repeated, his voice dropping an octave, "let us take you home." "I'm fine," I insisted, clutching my jacket. I walked away from the table, my legs shaking. I could feel his eyes on my back. I pushed through the diner door, ignoring Cletus's worried look, and ran out into the alley. The rain hit me like a physical blow, instantly soaking my hair and my thin scrubs. My car, a 1998 Rust Bucket, was parked where I always left it, under the flickering security light. I jammed my key in the lock, my fingers fumbling and wet. I got the door open, threw myself inside, and slammed it shut, my heart hammering against my ribs. I was safe. I put the key in the ignition and turned it. The engine whined, but the car lurked to one side, a sick grinding sound coming from the passenger front wheel. I slumped over the steering wheel, my breath fogging the glass. No, not tonight. I got back out, the rain plastering my hair to my face. I walked to the front of the car. The tire wasn't just flat, it had been slashed. 3 long, deep gashes in the sidewall. Perfectly spaced. It was deliberate. It was a message. The alley was dark, but not dark enough. A shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness by the diner's back door. It was Cassian, when he was standing there, the rain rolling off his expensive coat, not even bothering with an umbrella. He wasn't smiling. "See," he said, his voice carrying easily over the storm. He walked toward me, slowly. I was trapped between him and the ruined car. He stopped a few feet away. "They know you feed him," he said. "They know you're his anchor. That makes you a target. It makes you a liability. Or," he paused, taking another step, "it makes you a message." I was shaking, but not just from the cold. Who are they? The people who believed the useful lie, the people who want him to stay a ghost, the people who just cut your tires. He was in front of me now, and he was so close I could feel the heat coming off him, a stark contrast to the cold rain. He lifted his hand. I flinched, but he didn't touch my face. He placed his hand, just his fingertips, on the small of my back. It wasn't a push, it wasn't a caress, it was a claim, a simple, undeniable pressure that said, "You are with me now." The touch was warm, even through my wet jacket, and it sent a jolt straight up my spine. "You're coming with me, Lena Hart," he said. It wasn't a question. He turned, his hand still on my back, and began to guide me through the rain, back toward the mouth of the alley where a long, black sedan without a single marking on it had just pulled up, its headlights cutting 2 perfect, white cones through the downpour. The other 4 men were already surrounding his father, moving him like a priceless, fragile artifact. I had no choice. I had walked into trouble when I picked up that first spoon of chowder, and now it was walking me home. The inside of the sedan was another world. The rain hammering on the roof was a dull, distant drumming, completely disconnected from the cold I'd felt just moments before. It smelled of rich leather and something clean and metallic. There were no license plates on the car. I'd seen that as I got in. The glass was thick, impossibly thick, distorting the angry red and blue lights of the harbor into soft, blurry watercolors. I was in the back, pressed against the door. Ira was in the middle, small and frail between me and his son. Cassian sat on the other side, a solid, unmoving shadow, his eyes fixed on the rain-streaked window. He hadn't spoken since he put his hand on my back. The man with the scar, Juno, was in the passenger seat. The one who had gotten the spoon, Vale, was driving. Vale drove with an unnerving smoothness, taking the slick, broken roads of the Port District as if they were freshly paved. His voice came from the front, calm and low, as if he were discussing inventory. The situation is fluid. The group calls itself Halcyon Spire. They've been rising for the last 18 months. They're clean, smart, no street-level muscle, all paper and data. He glanced in the rearview mirror, his eyes meeting mine for a fraction of a second. Their primary weapon is a shell company, a ghost entity. They call it the Urban Basin Authority, the UBA. It sounds official. It sounds like the city. It doesn't exist. Ira made a small, rattling sound in his chest. Cassian remained perfectly still. They forged shipping manifests, environmental impact reports, docking permits. Vale continued. They intercept a real contract, undercut it with their fake UBA credentials, and reroute the cargo to their own holding facilities. They're parasites, stealing the port's blood, one contract at a time. And my father Cassian's voice was quiet, but it filled the car. Halcyon was behind the rumors 10 years ago. Vale said, his tone clipped. They engineered the betrayal story. With Ira Morello dead, his network fractured. Halcyon was there to pick up the pieces, absorbing his contacts, his roots. They built their foundation on his ghost. Now the ghost is back. They can't have him walking around, not even as a frail old man. They need to kill him, this time. For real. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. The ghost phone, the slashed tires. Wait, I said, my voice sounding small. All three men, Vale, Juno, and Cassian, focused on me. Ira just turned his head, his cloudy eyes blinking. There was someone, I said, forcing the words out, this past week, a man. He wasn't one of the regulars. He sat at Mr. Ira's booth, but, earlier, before Mr. Ira got there. He'd just ordered coffee. He did it for maybe 3 or 4 days. Cassian's eyes narrowed. What did he do? He just sat. He had a metal thermos, and he'd line it up with the spoon holder. I thought he was just particular, but yesterday, I saw him taking pictures with his phone. Pictures of what Juno asked from the front, turning in his seat. That's the weird part. Not of the diner, not of me. When he was taking pictures of the reflections, in the back of the soup spoons, the ones in the holder, the ones Mr. Ira uses. It had been so strange. I'd almost asked him to stop. Spycraft. Things I'd only seen in movies. Vale and Juno exchanged a look. Cassian's face went blank, which I was learning was far more dangerous than anger. He was sweeping for bugs, Cassian said, checking to see if you were wired or if the table was, and when you weren't. He sent the men to cut my tires. I finished, the blood draining from my face, to stop me from leaving. So you'd be trapped there with him, with me. Cassian just looked at me. They weren't trying to trap me. Lena, they were trying to see who I was. They were confirming I was the one meeting him. The car turned abruptly, diving down a ramp I never knew existed, into the side of a long, windowless brick building. A steel door rolled down behind us, silencing the storm completely. We were in a vast subterranean garage. We were taken to Warehouse 47. It wasn't a warehouse, not anymore. It was a bunker. The air was cool and damp, smelling of old brick, ozone, and the harbor water that must have been just on the other side of the walls. It was a cavernous space, but a nest of high-tech equipment glowed in the center. Banks of servers hummed. Maps, huge, detailed maps of the entire Rust Harbor complex, were pinned to the walls, covered in pushpins of different colors, red, yellow, green. As they settled Ira into a comfortable leather chair, a chair that looked completely out of place against the raw concrete floor, my eyes caught something on the wall. It was an old photograph, tacked to a corkboard, a younger mister, Ira, not frail, but strong, his shoulders broad, a smile on his face. Next to him stood a boy, maybe 12 years old. His hair was dark and unruly, and his hands were black with grease. He was looking up at Ira with a fierce, burning adoration. It was Cassian. He saw me looking, and he walked over, standing between me and the photo, blocking my view. "Juno," Cassian said, his voice hard. "Spectre wire. Run the diner. I want to know who made the call." Juno moved to a terminal. Spectre wire wasn't just a phrase, it was a system. A moment later, a massive map of the harbor lit up on a bank of monitors. It was a mobile, living thing. A red dot pulsed, leaving a faint trail. "Got it. Boss," Juno said. "Ghost phone signal. It pinged us right as we arrived, but the signal, it didn't come from the street." Cassian was already watching the screen. It came from inside the diner. "Yes," Juno said, his voice tight. "The signal that followed Lena, the one that tracked her movements for the last week, didn't originate from the man with the spoons. That was surveillance. The ghost phone was activation, the call to Halcyon. The one that sent the tire slashers came from inside, from another customer." My heart stopped. "Who?" Juno typed, his fingers flying. A new icon appeared on the map. A blue dot. "The phone is registered to a holding company, which is owned by—" He paused. "Boss, it's owned by a subsidiary of Morello Imports." A Morello. Someone in his own family. The trap wasn't for Ira, it was for Cassian, and I was the one who had sprung it. Cassian's jaw clenched so tightly I saw a muscle jump in his cheek. He didn't speak. He just stared at the map. Betrayal. That was the one thing he didn't negotiate. "Son." Ira's voice was a soft rasp, but it cut through the hum of the servers. Cassian turned to him. "Don't burn the port to catch one rat. You'll sink us all." Cassian looked at his father, his gray eyes like chips of ice. "I won't burn it," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "I'll set a trap. With steel wire." He turned, and his gaze fell on me. The air crackled. I wasn't just a waitress anymore. I was the key. I was the one thing the traitor and Halcyon Spire both knew about. I was the anchor. "They used you to find me," Cassian said. "They know you're his vulnerability. Now they know you're mine." My vulnerability. The words hit me harder than the rain. "We're going to use you, Lena," he stated. "We'll use you as bait. We'll leak that you're with us. We'll make you visible. The rat will have to move, to silence you or to use you again. And when he does, I'll be waiting." I looked at this man, who lived in a world of shadows and steel wire. I looked at the old man he was protecting, and I thought about the men who cut my tires, who used a fake government agency to squeeze the life out of the docks, who hurt people like me. I stood up straighter. My voice didn't shake. "I'll do it. I agree." Cassian watched me, his expression unreadable. On one condition, I said, a flicker of something. Annoyance, surprise. "We don't negotiate. You do this time." I met his gaze. "I don't want your money. I don't want your protection, not permanently. I want a promise. The people who did this, Halcyon, the UBA, the rat in your family, they don't just hurt you. They hurt the docks. They hurt ordinary people, civilians, people just trying to get by." I took a breath. "You have to promise me you'll bring them into the light, all of them, not just your enemies, the ones who touch people like me. You promise me you'll expose them for what they are." We stared at each other for a long 10 seconds. The hum of the servers was the only sound. He gave a single, sharp nod. "Hart," he said. It was the first time he'd used my last name. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a greeting. It was a seal, a brand. He had agreed. I let out the breath I didn't know I was holding. "From the chair, mister." Ira's trembling hand found mine. His skin was paper thin, but his grip was firm. "You made him promise," he whispered, a faint smile touching his lips. "Good." The night of the trap smelled like rust and cold water. We were in B-Lot, a graveyard of shipping containers stacked 3 high, creating a maze of dark, metal canyons. The rain hadn't let up. It was a driving, horizontal spray that stung my face. I was the bait. The plan was for me to be visible, a lost, scared woman, walking the perimeter until the rat, the Morello traitor, sent his hounds to silence me. I wore my same thin raincoat, useless against this weather. My hair was pulled back in a knot so tight it hurt my scalp, but strands were already whipping free, plastering themselves to my cheeks. We stood in a narrow gap between 2 massive red containers. The only light came from a distant pole, casting long, warped shadows. Cassian was in front of me, fitting a heavy black motorcycle helmet onto my head. "It's too big," I whispered, my voice echoing inside the padding. "It's not for a crash," he said. His voice was close, vibrating through the shell. "The comms are wired in. Don't speak unless I speak first." He reached behind my head to adjust the strap. His fingers were rough, calloused, but his touch was surprisingly gentle as he threaded the nylon. His knuckles brushed the sensitive skin on my jaw, and his fingertips grazed the nape of my neck, just below my hairline. A jolt, sharp and sudden, shot straight down my spine. It was like touching a live wire. My breath hitched, and my entire body tensed. He must have felt it. The tiny tremor that ran through me. His fingers stilled for a barest fraction of a second, a silent acknowledgement, before he finished buckling the strap. He stepped back, his face a mask of shadows. "Pay attention, Hart." He held up his hand, fingers splayed. He balled it into a tight fist. "This means stop. Freeze. Do not take another step." He tapped his forearm twice, with 2 fingers. "This means we have eyes on us. They're watching." Then he tapped his own chest, right over his heart with the flat of his hand. "This means I'm here. I'm close. Do not panic." I nodded, my throat too tight to form words. I tapped my own chest in understanding. "Good," he said. "Now walk. Vale is on the north crane. Juno is in the van. Riggs and I will be your shadow. Stay in the light." I stepped out of the narrow gap and into the open. Rain-slicked lane. Every step was agony. The wind howled, rattling the container doors like angry ghosts. I walked, forcing myself to look lost, to hunch my shoulders. I was shaking. It was the cold. Yes, the rain seeping through my coat and chilling me to the bone, but it was also a deep, primal fear. My teeth chattered, a sound that was stolen by the wind. After I passed the 3rd stack, Cassian's dark form materialized from the blackness. He grabbed my arm and pulled me out of the main lane, into the cover of a small, rattling corrugated tin roof that jutted out from a loading bay. "You're shaking too much," he said, his voice a low growl. "It's too real. They'll know it's a trap." I can't stop," I stammered, hugging myself. "It's freezing." He looked at me, and his expression was something I couldn't read. It was a deep frustration, but not at me. At the rain, at the cold, at the entire situation. He frowned, a deep line forming between his brows as he scanned the yard. Then he moved. He didn't ask. He unbuttoned his own long, heavy wool coat with a single fluid motion. He shrugged it off his shoulders and wrapped it around me, pulling me back against the wall. The coat was huge. It enveloped me, the weight of it like a shield. It was incredibly warm, and it smelled of him, that scent of leather, damp wool, and something clean and metallic, like ozone. He pulled the thick lapels together, his arms caging me in for a moment, his body heat trapping me in a cocoon of warmth. "Better," he murmured, his voice close to my ear. I could only nod, clutching the front of the coat. We stood there in the sudden quiet, shielded from the worst of the storm. The rain drummed a frantic, loud rhythm on the tin roof just above our heads. He stood beside me, not touching, but close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. He was scanning the yard, his head moving in slow, precise arcs. He was completely focused, his jaw set, his eyes narrowed against the rain. A strange, hysterical bubble rose in my chest, the absurdity of it all. Me, the diner waitress, standing in a storm, wearing a mafia boss's coat, acting as bait. I let out a small, choked laugh. His head snapped toward me, his eyes instantly sharp. "What?" "You," I whispered, pulling the heavy collar higher. "The way you frown when you're thinking, it's intense, like you're trying to build the entire harbor in your head." He just stared at me. The harsh lines of his face didn't soften, but his eyes changed. He looked at my mouth, at the smile I was trying to hide, and the ice in his gaze thawed. He looked at me like a man who had been walking in a desert for a decade, who had forgotten what water looked like, and had just stumbled upon a clear, cool spring. For 1 second, he wasn't Cassian Morello, the boss, and he was just a man, looking at a woman. That second shattered. A scrape, a boot on wet concrete, just around the corner. Cassian's reaction was inhumanly fast. Before I could even process the sound, his arm clamped around my waist like a steel band, and he spun me, slamming me flat against the cold, ribbed metal of the container wall. He pressed his entire body against mine, a human shield. One hand was flat on the wall by my head, the other pressed low on my back, holding me immobile. I was pinned. My face was turned toward his, trapped between the freezing wall and the hard, warm plane of his chest. I could feel his heart pounding, a steady, powerful beat against my own frantic, rabbit pulse. His breath was hot on my cheek, fogging in the cold air. We were so close. We were breathing each other's air. It wasn't a kiss, but it was more intimate than any kiss I'd ever had. It stretched, lasting longer than a single heartbeat, becoming its own small eternity. He leaned closer, his lips brushing the shell of my ear. His body was tense, a coiled spring, but his voice was a perfectly calm, low whisper. "When this is over," he breathed, the words a vibration that ran through my whole body. "We're going to get hot peach pie from the all-night place on Pratt Street. You haven't had the right kind in this city." A promise. About after. It was so normal, so mundane. It was the most insane thing I'd ever heard. It was his way of saying we will get through this. I turned my head, just an inch, until our noses were almost touching. His gray eyes were focused, dark and holding mine. "If you're still making promises," I whispered back, my own voice shaky, "it means you plan on living." His eyes promised me more than pie. A dot of red light appeared on the metal wall, right next to my head, a laser sight. The trap was sprung. I stopped breathing. Cassian didn't even flinch. He just flattened his hand against the top of my head, a gentle but firm pressure. "Stay," he commanded. Then he was gone. He didn't just move. He exploded away from me, launching himself out from under the tin roof and into the rain. He was a shadow detaching itself from the deeper darkness, a knife cutting through the night. I heard a grunt, a muffled shout, the wet, sickening sound of a fist connecting with bone. Another shout, cut off short. Floodlights, 2 black vans, engines silent, screeched to a halt, their headlights pinning 2 men against a stack of pallets. Juno and Vale were out before the vans stopped rolling, moving with a brutal, practiced efficiency. The 2 trackers were on the ground, zip-tied, before they even knew what hit them. Riggs. Cashin's 4th man was patting them down. He stood up, holding a small plastic card. "Boss," he called out. "UBA. It's an active access card." Cassian walked back to me, rolling his shoulders. He was untouched. He stopped under the tin roof, the rain dripping from his dark hair. He looked at me, his face impassive in the harsh white light. "You're good bait, Hart," he said. It wasn't praise. It was a simple statement of fact. The rain, as if on cue, suddenly softened. The furious drumming on the roof above us eased to a gentle patter. The chaos was over, leaving a sudden, ringing silence in its wake. The adrenaline began to drain from my body, leaving me hollow and cold, my legs weak. Cassian watched me, his expression unreadable. He reached out, not to grab me, but just placed one finger under my chin, tilting my face up to his. His gaze dropped to my mouth. He looked at me for a long second, as if committing me to memory. Then he leaned in. His lips touched mine. It was the lightest pressure, barely there. My lips were cold and wet from the rain. His were warm. It wasn't a kiss of passion or hunger. It was quiet, hesitant. It wasn't possession. It was a treaty. A fragile agreement signed in the silence after a storm. He pulled back, his gray eyes searching mine. Then he nodded. Once. As if a decision had been made, the kiss ended as quickly as it began. He pulled back, his gray eyes dark and unreadable in the harsh floodlights. The moment of fragile peace was gone, replaced by the cold, hard reality of the men being loaded into the van. Cassian turned from me. All business again. Riggs, the card. Get it to Spectre Wire. I want to know where it sleeps. We were back in Warehouse 47 within 20 minutes. The air was no longer just damp. It was electric with a new, frantic energy. The two captured men were nowhere to be seen, taken to a different, darker part of the Morello operation. I was sitting on a hard metal stool, still wrapped in Cassian's heavy coat, clutching a mug of coffee so hot it burned my hands. It was the only part of me that felt warm. Got it. Juno called out from the bank of monitors. His fingers were a blur on the keyboard, the main screen, which had shown the map of the container yard, now flickered, showing a rapid sequence of data. The UBA card isn't just a key, Juno said, his voice tight. It's a digital handshake. It pinged its server 3 times tonight, just before our friends showed up. The server is localized, not at a city building, not at the Port Authority. He typed one last command. A new image filled the screen, a sleek, glass and steel building on Ferrum Avenue, miles from the water. Neon Haven Security, veil red, leaning over Juno's shoulder. Private security, high-end corporate clients, clean, very clean. A little too clean, Cassian murmured. He was standing in front of the main map of the harbor, staring at it as if he could will the answers out of the colored pins. Halcyon Spire is a ghost. Neon Haven is its body. That's the shell. Boss, Juno said, his voice suddenly quiet. He turned from the screen to look at Cassian. I ran the executive board for Neon Haven, the director of security operations, the man who signs the checks for their field agents. Who? Cassian's voice was flat. It's Auric. The name landed in the room like a stone. Cassian didn't move. He didn't even flinch. He just closed his eyes for a single, long second. Auric, he repeated. The name was acid in his mouth. My cousin. The rat, the traitor. It wasn't just an enemy, it was his own blood, the man who had sent those trackers, who had used me as bait to identify his own cousin. Was family. I watched a muscle in Cassian's jaw leap, a silent testament to the rage he was holding in. Son, Ira's voice, frail as ever, cut through the tension. He was in his leather chair, a blanket tucked around his legs. He looked older than he had in the diner, as if the night's events had drained him. He was always jealous, Ira rasped, staring into his lap. Of you, of what you were meant to build. You knew, Cassian's voice was dangerously low. I suspected, Ira admitted, which is why I left. I looked from father to son. Left, I asked. I thought, no, Vale said you vanished, that Halcyon faked your death. Ira shook his head, a slow, painful motion. Halcyon spread the rumors. Yes, but I let them. I faked my own death, Lena. 10 years ago. It was the only way. He looked at Cassian. Halcyon was a new breed, all paper and code. I couldn't fight them in the shadows, so I became a shadow myself. I went silent, let them think I was gone, and waited. I was trying to lure them out, to make them overplay their hand, to see their full network. And did they? Cassian asked, his voice raw. No, Ira whispered. They just won. They took the routes, the contacts, and I stayed a ghost until... His voice trailed off. He looked at his own trembling hands. Until the stroke. 6 months ago, a small one, the doctors said, but it took my strength. It took my hands. He met my gaze, his eyes filled with a deep, weary shame. I was a legend who couldn't feed himself. I was starving, right in the middle of the city I used to own. And then you just saw an old man. You didn't see a symbol. You just saw a person. The weight of it settled on me. This entire massive conspiracy, this war for the harbor, had been cracked open by a single bowl of clam chowder, by one small act of kindness. I looked at the screen, at the gleaming image of Neon Haven, at the fake UBA credentials. So fight them your way, I said, my voice quiet but clear. Cassian turned to me. What? Fight them with paper, with code. You said the Urban Basin Authority is a ghost, a fake, but they're using its authority. They're hiding behind its name. So, call their bluff. I stood up, walking closer to the screens. You can't just send men with guns to a glass tower on Ferrum Avenue. You'll be arrested. But the UBA can be investigated. You said they create fake permits, fake inspections, so create one of your own. I pointed at the screen. You set up a fake port standards inspection, a public one. You use their own fake legal language against them. You leak it to the press. You force Halcyon Spire and Auric to show up and defend their fake agency. You make them step out of the shadows, and when they do, you just put the light on them. Cashin finished, his voice hushed. He was looking at me, really looking at me, the way he had under the tin roof. Not as bait, not as a problem. He was looking at me like I was a map he'd never seen before, one that showed a way out. You're not weak, Hart, he said, his voice soft. You just lack weapons. He turned to his men. I like it, Vale. Get me everything on Bay Pulse News. It's an independent streaming channel. Halcyon and Auric have used it before to pump their community support stories. We'll use it to announce our inspection. What inspection, Juno asked. A staged shipment, I said, the idea forming as I spoke. The UBA is announcing a new community support initiative, free supplies, something for the docks, a public event. It forces Auric and his Neon Haven security to be there, to play the part of the good guys. And who calls them out, Vale said. I took a deep breath. I do. I'm not just bait. I'm a resident. I'm a worker at the Harbor and Grit. I have a right to ask questions. I'll get up and I'll speak. I'll demand to know who the UBA is. I'll demand transparency. I'll be the one to put the light on them. No, Cashin's voice was sharp, absolute. It's too dangerous. They won't just slash your tires this time. You promised me, I said, meeting his hard gaze. You promised you'd bring the ones who touch people like me into the light. This is the only way. You can't win this with shadows. You have to win it with light. We stared at each other, a silent battle of wills. The tension stretched, thick and heavy. He finally broke. Fine. He let out a harsh breath. But you're not going in blind. He went to a drawer and pulled out a simple silver chain with a small, flat black pendant, shaped like a teardrop. He fastened it around my neck himself, his fingers brushing my collarbone, warm against my cold skin. It's a beacon, he said, his voice low and for my ears only. You touch it, just press the center, and my entire team comes down on that location in 30 seconds. You feel anything wrong, you hit it. Cassian, Ira called out. He was holding a pen, his hand shaking, writing on a piece of paper. He tore it from the pad and held it out to me. I took it. It was a list, a short list of 5 names. Old friends, Ira rasped. Longshoremen, union leaders. Their trust is cheap. Lena, because they've been betrayed so many times. But they're the real Harbor. Go to them. Don't pay with money. Pay with honesty. Tell them what you told us. Tell them you want to bring things into the light. They'll listen to you. The next hour was a blur. Tomas, the one who had stayed with Ira during the container yard trap, took me to a corner of the warehouse. For 60 minutes, he drilled me. He wasn't gentle. He taught me how to spot a camera's blind spot. He taught me the 3 ways to break a grip on my wrist. He taught me to count the stairs, to always know where the exits were, to use my elbows and knees. My body learned how to move in ways I never thought possible. My heart was pounding, but for the first time, it wasn't just from fear. It was from learning. The whole time, Cassian stood in the shadows, just outside the ring of light where we were training. He didn't interfere. He didn't speak. He just watched. His arms were crossed, his focus entirely on me. I saw him, his face half in shadow, his gray eyes tracking my every move, and for a moment, a rare, fleeting moment. He didn't look like the shadow of the harbor. He looked like a man, watching a woman he had kissed in the rain, and terrified of what he was about to let her do. The plaza at Ferrum Avenue was a stage set for a lie. It was all glass and steel, cold and impersonal, reflecting the gray, overcast sky. Banners, a cheerful, offensive blue, hung from the lampposts, proclaiming the Urban Basin Authority and a new day for Rust Harbor. A podium stood in front of the building's glass doors, flanked by massive LED screens. A crowd had gathered, not just the curious, but the people I had spent the last 2 days talking to. The men from Ira's list, their faces were weathered, skeptical. They had come, not because they believed the UBA, but because they believed me. They stood in a silent, solid block, their work jackets a stark contrast to the suits. Then they arrived. A black SUV purred to the curb. Auric stepped out, Cassian's cousin. He was handsome, polished, his smile a perfect, empty crescent. He wore a suit that probably cost more than my car. He was followed by a dozen men in crisp, matching uniforms, the UBA logo stitched over their hearts. They moved with a stiff, unnatural precision, fanning out, their eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses despite the lack of sun. They were broadcasting security so loud it felt like a threat. The Bay Pulse News streamer, a young woman with a microphone, flagged Auric down. He laughed, a sound that didn't reach his eyes, and gestured to the podium. This was his show. My heart was a fist, pounding against my ribs. The beacon was a cold weight on my chest, beneath my shirt. I could feel Cassian's presence. Somewhere in the crowd, a magnetic pull. Auric finished his slick, empty speech about community partnership and transparent logistics. My cue. I walked to the microphone set up for public comment. My hands were shaking. My first words were a disaster, a trembling, thin whisper. My name is Lena Hart. I work at the Harbor and Grit Diner. I saw Auric's smile falter for a second. He hadn't expected this. I looked out at the crowd, found the faces from Ira's list. I found old man Hemlock, a crane operator for 40 years. I found Maria, who ran the union's front office. They nodded, just once. My voice steadied. The shaking stopped. It was as if I had grabbed onto an anchor. You talk about community, I said, my voice now clear, carrying over the speakers. I want to talk about a man, an old man, a man named Ira. I saw Auric's head jerk, his eyes narrowing. He comes in every night. His hands shake so badly he can't eat. For weeks, I've fed him. Just a bowl of soup. Because everyone, no matter who they are, has a right to a hot meal, a right to be seen. I pointed at the UBA banner. This authority. It doesn't see us. It sees permits. It sees cargo. It doesn't see the people. It doesn't see the man who needs to be fed. So I'm asking, who are you? And who gave you the right to speak for us? The crowd was silent, listening. The Bay Pulse streamer, sensing a story, swiveled her camera from Auric and zoomed in on my face. That was the signal. In the back, in a control van I couldn't see, Cassian hit the button. The massive LED screens behind Auric flickered. His smiling corporate logo vanished. It was replaced by text, lines and lines of it, scrolling fast, under a simple header, UBA internal contracts. It was Spectre Wire, broadcast live, fake shipping manifests, ghost payrolls for community consultants, contracts rerouted to shell companies, dollar amounts, millions, all flowing back to one place, Neon Haven Security. The crowd gasped. A low, angry murmur started, growing into a roar. Auric's face went from pale to white. He spun, saw the data streaming, and made a sharp cutting motion across his throat to his security detail. Cut the power! The plaza lights, the speakers, the screens, they all died. We were plunged into a sudden, shocking silence, a gray twilight, for a heartbeat. Then a new sound, the deep, throaty thrum of a generator, Riggs. He'd bypassed the main grid. The plaza lights snapped back on, brighter than before. The LED screens rebooted, the data stream picking up right where it left off. The light didn't die. Auric's mask of civility shattered. He barked a single word, her. The fake UBA guards were no longer playing security. They were soldiers. 2 of them lunged, not for the screens, but for me. They never made it. Cassian moved through the crowd as if it were water. He wasn't a man, he was a force. The world seemed to slow down. The camera in my head zoomed in. He didn't punch, he didn't shove, he just moved. One guard reached for him. Cassian intercepted the arm, his hand a blur, twisting the wrist at an angle it wasn't meant to bend, a snap. The man's taser clattered to the pavement. Cassian spun, using the first man's body as a shield against the second, and disarmed him in the same fluid, brutal motion, like he was clearing dishes from a table. It took less than 3 seconds. I was backing away, but a third guard, one from my blind side, got through. His hand clamped around my arm, fingers digging into my bicep, pulling me off balance. My mind went white with panic. Then Tomas's voice in my head, "They pull, you go with it, use their force." I didn't fight the pull. I let it yank me forward, and as he dragged me, I stomped my heel down on his instep. He grunted, his grip loosening for just a second. Knee to the groin, turn the hip, break the grip. I didn't hesitate. I drove my knee up hard and twisted my body, yanking my arm free. As I stumbled back, I jammed my hand under my shirt and pressed the beacon. The pendant emitted a single, high-pitched ping, audible even over the shouting. "Lena?" Juno was there. He appeared out of nowhere, grabbed me by the front of my coat and threw me sideways, shoving me into the gap behind a massive speaker stack. I hit the ground hard, my ears ringing with feedback. "Stay down," he commanded, and was gone. From my hiding place, I had a perfect, horrifying view. The plaza was chaos, but in the center, a pocket of calm had formed. Cassian stood facing Auric, the 2 cousins, 10 feet apart. "This is beneath you, Auric." Cassian's voice was low, but it carried. Auric laughed, that hollow, empty sound. "Beneath me, I'm cleaning up the family's mess. Our blood shouldn't be selling out the harbor. We should own it." "Morello blood doesn't sell out the harbor's people?" Cassian shot back. "You're still sentimental," Auric sneered. He gave a small, almost invisible signal. "You always were. You think these civilians matter. You think your father's ghost matters? I learned something he never did. Loyalty is for sale." He snapped his fingers. Orchid units secure the asset. The UBA guards were a distraction. From the side streets, new men appeared. They wore no uniforms, just black fatigues, tactical vests. They moved with a terrifying, silent professionalism. These were Halcyon's real soldiers, mercenaries. One of them lunged at Tomas, who had been clearing a path. It wasn't a fist, it was a blade. A long, thin knife. Tomas cried out, a sharp, choked sound as the blade cut a deep gash along his forearm. The air filled with a new smell, the coppery metallic tang of blood. My comm buzzed. It wasn't Cassian. It was a frail, rattling voice. Ira, when he was in the sedan, watching everything. "Cassian, Lena, listen to me." His voice was urgent, paper thin. "It's a pincer. They're trying to push you into the dark, into the alley. Don't let them. Stay in the light. The light is the only law tonight. Stay in the light." As if on cue, a siren wailed, a fake UBA patrol car, lights flashing, trying to create an official perimeter, to scare the crowd away, to make them run. But the crowd didn't run. The dock workers, the men and women from Ira's list, the people I had spoken to, they held their ground. They had seen the cut. They had seen the blood. They had seen the truth on the screens. Old Man Hemlock took one step forward, then another. He didn't have a weapon. He had his phone. He raised it, the camera light snapping on, a single, bright beam. Maria raised hers, then the man next to her, and the man next to him. In seconds, the plaza wasn't a dark, chaotic brawl. It was a stadium. 100 phones were raised, 100 camera lights all pointing at the center. At Auric and his Orchid unit, they were trapped in a sea of light, broadcast live, not just by Baypulse, but by the entire harbor. The world dissolved into a smear of shouting, running bodies, and the blinding strobes of 100 phone cameras. The lights from the crowd had frozen Auric and the Orchid unit, a tableau of shocked, guilty faces trapped in a cage of light. Then Cashin's hand was on my arm. Juno, the exit. West Side Go-Go. We weren't walking, we were flying. Cashin had me tucked against his side, his body a solid wall, moving with a predator's grace. We plunged from the bright, chaotic plaza into a dark, narrow service corridor. The sounds of the crowd were instantly muffled, replaced by the echo of our own running footsteps on bare concrete. He didn't stop until we hit a heavy steel door. He slammed it open, shoved me inside, and followed, the door sighing shut behind us. He hit the lock. The heavy click of the deadbolt sliding home echoed in the tiny, windowless room. It was a backstage prep room. The air was cold and smelled of dust and old wiring. A single, bare bulb hummed overhead. And then the adrenaline left me. It was a physical evacuation. My body, which had been tense and sharp and alive, suddenly remembered it was just me. My legs gave out. I didn't fall. I just slid down the wall, my back scraping the rough concrete, until I was sitting on the floor. Then the shaking started. It wasn't a shiver. It was a violent, uncontrollable tremor, a storm in my own muscles. My teeth chattered so hard my jaw ached. I wrapped my arms around my knees, trying to hold myself together, but it was useless. I was falling apart. He stood in the center of the room, breathing hard, watching me. Heart! I couldn't answer. I just shook. He let out a long, slow breath. He moved, and I flinched, my whole body tensing for a blow or a command. He didn't touch me. I just crouched down in front of me, his knees almost touching mine. He was so close. The dampness from the rain on his suit, the heat coming off his skin, the smell of the night, it all enveloped me. He didn't say it's okay. He didn't say you're safe. He leaned in, slowly, until his forehead rested against mine. His skin was warm. He closed his eyes. "I promised you peach pie," he whispered. The words were so absurd, so normal, so completely out of place in this world of violence and shadows that a sound tore out of my throat. It was a laugh, sharp and hysterical, but it broke on a sob. And then I was crying. The shaking turned into deep, racking sobs, the kind that come from a place so deep you forget it exists. All the fear, the diner, the tires, the ghost phone, the knife, the blinding lights, it all came pouring out. He just stayed there, his forehead pressed to mine, letting me break. When the worst of it passed, he pulled back, just an inch. His gray eyes were dark, searching mine. He didn't grab me. He didn't force the comfort. He just offered. He held his hand out, palm up, in the small space between us. It was a question. It was a choice. My choice. His hand was calloused, strong, scarred on the knuckles. It was the hand that had disarmed two men. It was the hand that had gently adjusted my helmet. My own hand was shaking so badly I could barely control it, but I lifted it. I placed my palm against his. His fingers closed around mine instantly. Not hard, but with an absolute, possessive strength. And he pulled me from the floor and straight into him. He was on his knees, and he pulled me into his arms, crushing me against his chest. I was half on his lap, half on the floor, tangled up in him. My face was buried in the space between his neck and shoulder. His arms wrapped around me. One hand splayed wide across my back, the other gripping my shoulder, holding me steady, absorbing the tremors. He was so solid. He was like the pier itself, a structure built to withstand 1,000 storms. He didn't move. He just held me, letting me shake, letting me cry into his suit. The smell of him was overwhelming damp wool, the metallic tang of the air, and something else. Something uniquely him, like warm asphalt after a storm. "You're okay," he murmured, his voice a low vibration against my temple. "I've got you. Heart, you're okay." I don't know how long we stayed like that, long enough for my shaking to ease, for my sobs to quiet into ragged breaths. I angled my head, pulling back just enough to see him. His face was inches from mine. His hair was damp and falling over his forehead. His eyes were fixed on my mouth. This time that there was no rain, no tin roof, no trap. He leaned in, and I met him halfway. It was nothing like the first kiss. That had been a question, a treaty signed in the cold. This was the answer. It was a kiss that had been waiting. It was desperate and deep, and it was a release. It tasted of the cold night, of adrenaline, and of him. His lips were not soft, they were firm, demanding, and I answered with a hunger I didn't know I possessed. My hands, which had been clenched in his suit, moved up. One hand gripped his shoulder, and the other, my free hand, slid up his chest, my fingers tracing the line of his lapel until they found the skin of his neck. His hand left my shoulder entangled in my damp hair, tilting my head, holding me for the kiss. His other hand remained on my back, his thumb rubbing slow, steady circles on the small of my back. It was not a lover's caress, not yet. It was the touch of a man calming a spooked animal, trying to gentle a fear that was older than tonight. Our breath synced, became one, the world outside, the sirens, Auric, the orchid unit. It all dissolved. There was only this small, cold room, the single bare bulb, and the heat between us. The kiss broke, but we didn't part. We stayed, foreheads touching, breathing each other's air. My hand, the one on his chest, splayed out, just needing to feel that solidness. My fingers brushed the hard ridge of a scar, just above his collarbone, at the V of his shirt. It was old, but deep. I traced it, my fingertip following the line of damaged skin. His breath caught. He didn't pull away. "The day my mother died," he whispered. His voice was raw, stripped of all its armor. I was 15. She was sick. The power went out in a storm. I promised her I'd fix the generator. I was in the dark, trying to fix it when she died, alone. He opened his eyes. His gray gaze was so clear, so unguarded, it took my breath away. "I promised myself," he said, his voice thick. "I would never let anyone I cared about wait in the dark again, ever. My promise, bring them into the light." He hadn't just agreed, he had understood. I looked at this man, this shadow of the harbor, and I saw the 15-year-old boy, his hands covered in grease, alone in the dark. I leaned in and kissed him again. The second kiss was completely different. It was slow, it was deliberate, it wasn't hungry, it was understanding. It was brighter than the first. He was lowering his walls for me, showing me the broken parts he kept hidden. And I was choosing to stay, choosing to see him. It was no longer the frantic search for an anchor in a storm. This was the anchor itself. He let out a low groan, and his hand tightened in my hair, pulling me closer. The kiss deepened, became something new, something that was about to... A sharp metallic bang on the steel door. "Boss, we're clear. Tomas's hit, but stable. We have to move." It was Vale's voice. We broke apart, instantly. The spell was shattered. Cassian was the boss again. His eyes hardened, the mask sliding back into place, but he was still looking at me, his breath coming fast. "We're not safe yet," he said. "It wasn't an end. It was a pause. It was a promise for later." I nodded, my body still thrumming. I suddenly felt disheveled, my lips swollen from his, my hair a mess. I ran a shaky hand over my shirt, trying to smooth it. Cassian stood up, pulling me with him. He didn't let go of my hand. He looked at me, at my flushed face and tangled hair. Then he did something that stopped my heart. He stepped back half a step, still holding my hand, and he waited for me to go first, through the door. It was a gesture of respect so profound, so out of place in his world of command and control, it was almost more intimate than the kiss. I walked out of that small, cold room, and he followed, his hand dropping from mine. We didn't touch as we walked down the concrete corridor, back toward the chaos. We didn't hold hands, but I could feel him, a solid presence at my back, and on the gray concrete floor, illuminated by the harsh utility lights, our two shadows stretched out, long and dark, and they were tangled together, all the way. Later that night, in the back of the armored sedan, my pocket buzzed. A new phone. One he had given me. A single text message. From Cassian. After all this, peach pie. I looked at the screen, a small smile touching my lips. I typed back one shaky reply. Keep your promise. We drove back to Warehouse 47 in a different kind of silence. The adrenaline from the fight was gone, leaving a sour, metallic taste in my mouth. My body ached from where I'd been grabbed, from where I'd hit the ground. The back of the sedan was a pocket of bruised quiet. Tomas was in the front seat, his arm bandaged, his face pale and set in grim lines. When the big steel door rolled up, Ira was waiting. He wasn't in his chair. He was standing, one hand pressed hard against his chest, leaning on a small, unfamiliar man in a suit. He shouldn't be on his feet, the man said, his voice quiet but firm. He had a medical bag at his feet. This was a private doctor, the kind who didn't file reports. Cassian was out of the car before it stopped, at his father's side. What is it? A warning, the doctor said, looking at Cassian. A transient ischemic attack, a mini-stroke. His pressure is through the roof. What you did tonight. It was too much. He needs rest. No more stress. Ira waved a trembling hand, dismissing him. I'm fine, doctor. I'm fine. He looked only at his son, his eyes burning with an old, painful light. You were good. You stayed in the light. Get him to his chair, Cassian ordered, his voice rough. As Vale and the doctor helped the frail old man, Ira's gaze found mine. You were good, too, Lena. You were the light. We settled him. The doctor gave him a small white pill, which he took with a grimace. Tomas was being stitched up by Riggs in the corner, a raw, silent procedure under a harsh spotlight. The warehouse felt like a field hospital after a battle. Cassian stood over his father, his face a mask of controlled fury. You knew about Auric. You knew, and you let me walk into that. I suspected, Ira rasped, his hand still on his chest. But that's not the truth, not the whole truth. He looked at his son, and I saw a decade of guilt surface. I didn't leave 10 years ago just to trick Halcyon. Cassian, that was only half the lie. Cassian went very still. I left, Ira said, his voice cracking, to protect you. Protect me. Cassian's voice was a low snarl. You left me. You left me to clean up your mess. You left me to grow up in your shadow, to fight for every piece of what you abandoned. To protect you from the stain, Ira whispered, his eyes filling. From the contracts I couldn't escape, the dirtiest ones. The warehouse was silent, save for the hum of the servers and the snip of Riggs's scissors on a bandage. The Orchid Unit, Ira said, and the name made Tomas flinch in the corner. They weren't always Halcyons. Not at first. They were a tool, a poison, and I used them. You, Cassian, looked stunned. Once, Ira said, his face ashen, just once, there was a ship, a refugee ship from... It doesn't matter. They were sick. Halcyon had them, was going to sell them, sell the people, to a labor ring. I couldn't let it happen. I couldn't fight them on the water, so I made a deal. I hired the Orchid Unit to get them out, to bring them to shore, to a safe house. He was shaking now, the memory costing him. And they did. They saved them all, every one, but the price. The price wasn't money, Halcyon. Even then was smarter than that. They didn't want my cash. They wanted me. They wanted my disappearance. It was their price for the deal. I had to become a ghost, or they would expose what I had done. Expose me as a trafficker, just to save them. They trapped me. Cassian was frozen. He looked like the 12-year-old boy in the photograph, hit by a truth so large it knocked the air from his lungs. His father hadn't abandoned him. He had sacrificed himself. He had paid a blood debt by disappearing, by letting his own name be tarnished, all to save a ship of people he didn't even know. And in doing so, he had forced his own son to grow up in that very shadow, to become the hard, cold man who had to fight for a broken kingdom. I moved, not thinking. I sat on the arm of Ira's chair, the way I used to at the diner, but this was different. I didn't have a spoon. I placed 2 fingers on the inside of his wrist. His skin was paper thin. His pulse was thready, a frantic bird's wing, too fast, too weak. I held it, trying to lend him some of my own steady rhythm, my own life. I thought of all the years I'd spent tracking Leo's breathing, measuring his pulse. I was measuring a lifetime of regret, a father's terrible choice. Ira opened his eyes and looked at my hand on his. He didn't pull away. Cassian's voice, when it came, was thick, unrecognizable. Who pulls their strings now? He needed a name for this pain. He needed a target. Ira's eyes slid shut. He was exhausted, but he spoke the name. The one who arranged the deal, the lawyer who brokered it, the one who knew where all the bodies were, who helped Halcyon build their paper cage. He took a rattling breath. Muriel Quill. The name hit the room and silenced it. Cassian took a step back, his face ashen. Quill, Muriel Quill, the city attorney. Yes, Ira whispered. But I saved her. Last year, there was a threat, a man who was stalking her. I took care of it for the city, for her. He had been played from every single side, the ultimate betrayal, the woman he had protected, a civic duty, was the very one who had orchestrated his family's downfall. Auric, Cassian said, the pieces clicking into place. Auric is just a mask, a loud, stupid mask. She's the one. She's Halcyon Spire. She's the queen. A city attorney? A public figure, untouchable by men in the shadows, but not by men in the light. The meeting, I said, my voice cutting through the stunned silence. They both looked at me. Ira, surprised. Cassian, his eyes latching onto me, desperate for a new map. The UBA, I said, my pulse finally steadying, my own plan forming. The Healthy Harbor Committee. That other fake entity you found. The public meeting they announced for next week in Warehouse 9. It's a publicity stunt, Vale said from the side, where he was cleaning a weapon. Exactly, I said, looking at Cassian. It's public, which means she has to be public. Auric is her face, but she's the lawyer. She's the one who makes it all look legal. If you leak the real records, all of them. The Spectre wire data, the bank accounts, the proof that Neon Haven and UBA are her private army. She'll have to show up, Cassian finished, his eyes lighting with a new, cold fire. She can't let her name be attached to a public failure. She'll have to come in person to contain it, to spin it, to shut it down. She'll walk into the light, I said, just like you promised me. Ira pushed himself up in the chair, his hand grabbing my arm. Yes, he rasped, his eyes fierce. Yes, the end must be in the light. No more revenge in the shadows, son. Do it. Do it her way. Clean. Cassian looked at his father, the man he had misunderstood for a decade. He saw the sacrifice, the pain, the ghost who wanted to come home. Then his gaze shifted to me. He saw the anchor, the light, the promise of a new way. He took a long, slow breath, and the tension that had held him like a steel wire for his entire life seemed to snap. We do it her way, he said, his voice quiet. We leak it all. We set the stage, and we let the light do the work. He paused, a strange, almost smile touching his lips. No more blood. Not if we can help it. He looked at me, as if he was surprised to hear the words come out of his own mouth. He was as surprised as I was. Warehouse 9 was dressed in lies. The Healthy Harbor Committee banners were a cheerful blue, hung from the steel rafters with a corporate precision that felt all wrong for the rust-streaked, cavernous space. They'd set up a stage, a podium, and a long table. The Bay Pulse news camera was already live, its red light a single, watchful eye in the gloom. But the warehouse wasn't filled with politicians or investors. It was packed, wall to wall, with the dock workers, Ira's list, I saw the faces I had spent the last 3 days talking to. Maria, from the union office, her arms crossed, her expression like granite. Old man Hemlock, his crane crew flanking him, their faces grim. They were quiet. 1,000-person jury waiting. They had come to see if the light I promised was real. Then she arrived, Muriel Quill. She didn't walk, she glided. Her suit was a pale, antiseptic gray. Her smile was a thin line, perfectly polite, utterly sterile. She looked at the rough-faced crowd with the detached curiosity of a scientist. Auric was half a step behind her, his empty handsomeness reduced to the status of an accessory, a shadow for her to cast. He looked nervous. She did not. Quill took her place at the table, arranging a single file in front of her. Then, from a side door, Cassian walked out. He wore no coat, no weapons were visible. Just looked like a man in a dark, well-cut suit, his face grim. He was carrying a single, heavy banker's box. He didn't go to the podium. He walked straight to the long table and dropped the box in front of Muriel Quill. The thud of the cardboard hitting the wood was loud in the tense silence. It was more final than a gunshot. "What is this, Mr. Morello?" Quill asked, her voice smooth, amplified by the microphone. "Achan, your paperwork," Cassian said. His voice, too, boomed through the warehouse. "The UBA contracts you forged, the ghost payrolls, the shell companies, the paper men you created to steal our harbor." The crowd murmured. The Baypulse camera panned from Quill's face to the box. She smiled, that sterile, bacteria-free smile. "Paperwork can be forged. Mr. Morello, anyone can print a piece of paper." "They can," Cassian said, his voice dangerously calm. He nodded to Juno, who was somewhere in the back at a terminal. But data streams don't lie. The massive screen behind the podium, the one meant to show the UBA's logo, flared to life. It wasn't a logo. It was the raw, unfiltered feed from Spectre Wire. Lines of code, bank transfers, routing numbers, a river of digital proof flowing from the city's Port Authority accounts, through the Urban Basin Authority shell, and into the Community Greentop Fund, a holding account. And the final destination of that fund, in stark, undeniable letters, Neon Haven Security, Halcyon Spire. The crowd exploded, a single deep roar of betrayal. Auric went white. He looked at Quill, his eyes wide with panic. Quill did not panic. She just gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Auric snapped his fingers. Orchid now. The men in UBA uniforms, the ones lining the walls, were not security. They were the Orchid unit. They reached for their belts. A series of sharp, hissing sounds. Smoke grenades. Canisters rolled across the concrete floor, erupting in thick, gray smoke. The crowd panicked. The roar of anger turned into a scream of fear. People began to shove, to run, pushing for the exits. The light was gone, replaced by a choking, artificial fog. It was the moment my heart stopped. They were using the chaos, the shadow, to escape. But they had forgotten Cassian's team. "Veil now," Cassian's voice bellowed over the screams. A loud, grinding boom echoed from above. It wasn't an explosion. It was the sound of old machinery coming to life. The warehouse roof, the massive skylight doors, were opening. Veil had pulled the emergency chain. 2 massive rectangles of pure, unforgiving daylight cut through the smoke. And they illuminated the second curtain. A massive 40-foot shipping container, suspended from the ceiling crane, hidden in the shadows until now. It was stamped with the bright blue UBA logo, and its side was open. It was filled, floor to ceiling, with illegal surveillance equipment, high-powered listening devices, tracking beacons, racks of hard drives. The hardware used to create the paper lies. It was the gun, smoking. As the crowd looked up, stunned, they missed the second act. Juno was at the main exit. He didn't run. He just slammed the heavy steel gate shut, the sound of it echoing like a vault. No one was leaving. And Tomas was in the rafters. I saw him. His bad arm in a sling, his face pale with pain. He was at a small console, his one good hand flying. The whir of small motors. Drones, a dozen of them, the size of dinner plates, shot down from the ceiling. They didn't have weapons. They dove through the smoke, their red and green lights flashing, homing in on the Orchid Unit soldiers. As the soldiers looked up, confused, the drones dropped their payload. Nylon zip ties, heavy-duty, pre-looped, they rained down on the mercenaries, entangling them. The click, click, click of the plastic cuffs tightening as the drones pulled them taut was the only sound for a second. A frantic, synthetic metronome. Muriel Quill saw her exit blocked. She saw her army neutralized. She saw her evidence hanging in the air. She went to her last weapon chaos. She turned and slammed her hand against a red fire alarm on the wall. A piercing, electronic shriek filled the air, overriding everything. The evacuation alarm. It was a calculated move to create a stampede, to force the police to come, to separate me, Cassian, all of us, in the ensuing panic. But I had the podium. I ran to the microphone, my heart hammering. "Wait!" I screamed, my voice cracking with feedback. Stay where you are." The crowd paused, caught between the alarm and my voice. "He told me," I yelled, my voice finding its anchor, "that the light is the only law. Do not run into the dark. Stand still, stay in the light." And they did. The dock workers, the families, the union men. They stopped shoving, they turned, hundreds of them, and they formed a solid human wall, protecting the center of the room, a soft wall of witnesses. The smoke began to clear. The tableau was set. Cassian walked through the last wisp of fog until he stood 10 feet from Muriel Quill. The alarm was still shrieking, a soundtrack to her defeat. "It ends in the light. Muriel," Cassian said, his voice quiet, but it carried. She looked at him, her face no longer sterile, but twisted with a cold, pure hatred. She turned, not for the main exit, but for a small, private door near the stage, her escape route. But the crowd parted. They moved aside, creating a path, but not for her. For him, Ira Morello. He walked slowly, his cane tapping on the concrete. He wore his old, frayed coat. He looked frail. He looked ancient. But he was there. The ghost was real. He walked, flanked by Old Man Hemlock and Maria, and he stopped right beside his son, between Cassian and Quill. The Bay Pulse camera, which had never stopped rolling, zoomed in. It was a perfect, terrible frame. The father, his name cleared, returned from the dead, the son, his promise kept, standing in the light, the traitors, Auric and Quill, their faces exposed, their paper kingdom in ashes. The alarm shrieked, the daylight poured in, and the camera, the single unblinking red eye, forced every face to finally be honest. Muriel Quill, trapped in the light, her face a mask of pale fury, played her last card. She wasn't a soldier, she was a lawyer. Her weapon was always paper. "This is not justice," she snapped, her voice cutting through the stunned silence, the wail of the alarm already a dying echo. She reached into her pristine briefcase and pulled out a single, stapled document. "This is a mob I have here." She held it up for the Bay Pulse camera. "A legal, binding warrant signed by the Urban Basin Authority for the arrest of Cassian Morello for inciting a riot and illegal industrial sabotage." She looked at the stunned Portstead watch, the union men. "You are civilians. Stand down or you will be charged with obstructing a federal investigation." She had named her ghost. She had made it official. But she had forgotten about me. She had forgotten about the hours I spent in the dark, with only a laptop and a borrowed password. I stepped forward, back to the microphone. "A warrant from who?" I asked. My voice was steady. The entire warehouse, 1,000 people, went silent. The camera swung to me. "A warrant from the Urban Basin Authority." I looked directly at Quill, and then past her, into the black lens of the camera. "I have a legal question. Miss Quill, I spent the last 3 nights searching the Maryland State Department of Assessments and Taxation Registry, every incorporated entity. every state-chartered authority, every registered trade name. I took a step closer. Quill's eyes, for the first time, showed a flicker of animal panic. "The Urban Basin Authority does not exist," I said, my voice ringing in the massive space. "It has no legal standing. It is not a state agency. It is not a federal agency. It is not a registered corporation. It is a name you printed on a banner." I pointed at the warrant in her hand. "So I ask you, Miss Quill, how can a ghost sign a warrant?" The crowd, the dock workers, the men of the Portstead Watch, they didn't just murmur, they understood. A low, deep rumble of anger. "Prove it," I challenged her. "Right now, on camera. Show us the state registration. Show us the legal entity." Quill's hand, the one holding the paper, began to shake. "Allow me," Cassian said. He nodded to Juno, who was back at his terminal. The giant LED screen, which still showed the incriminating surveillance equipment, flickered. It was replaced by a live mirror of the state database. We all watched as Juno's cursor typed in the words URBAN, BASINAUTHORITY. He hit search. One long second. The result flashed, 40 feet high, no records found. A sound, a massive, collective whoosh, like the ocean itself, swept through the warehouse. It was the sound of 1,000 people realizing the lie. Quill's magic was gone. Her power, the power of official-sounding words and paper threats, evaporated in the light. She was just a woman, alone, in a warehouse full of people she had tried to cheat. Oryx saw it. He saw the end. He wasn't a lawyer, he was a rat, and the ship was sinking. He panicked. He did the only thing a coward knows how to do. He lunged, ripping a handgun from the holster of a subdued, zip-tied orchid guard. He wasn't aiming at Cassian. He wasn't aiming at me. He was aiming at the lights, at the ceiling, to create chaos, to bring back the shadow. "No!" he screamed, his face a mask of terror as he raised the gun. He never fired. Cassian moved. It wasn't a tackle. It wasn't a fight. It was a precise, brutal piece of engineering. His hand shot out, not at the gun, but at Oryx's wrist. He parried the arm upward, and as it rose, he twisted, a sharp, wet crack of bone. Oryx screamed, a high, thin sound. The gun didn't go off. It just fell, clattering uselessly onto the concrete. The camera captured every second, the desperate attempt at violence, the clean, calculated, non-lethal response. Oryx crumpled to the ground, cradling his broken arm, sobbing. The silence that followed was absolute. Into that silence, Ira Morello stepped forward. He took the microphone from my hand. His voice was frail, thin, but the speakers made him a giant. "I left this harbor, Ari," he rasped, his voice breaking, "to save people with no names, people who were lost in the dark." He looked at Quill, at Oryx on the floor. He looked at the camera. "Today," he said, his voice gaining a sudden, steel strength, "I have returned to give a name to the people who feed on the citizens of this harbor. Their names are Muriel Quill and Oryx Morello." Old Man Hemlock, the leader of the Portstead Watch, stepped forward. He looked at Quill. She didn't move. She was a statue of gray ice. "Muriel Quill," Hemlock said, his voice like rocks grinding together. "You are being detained by the citizens of Rust Harbor, pending investigation." The watch moved in. There was no violence. They simply put their hands on her arms. They cuffed Oryx. They began leading the stunned, defeated Orchid Unit members, one by one, toward the door. It was an ending. A quiet, decisive cleaning. Cassian stood alone, in the center of the warehouse, in a pool of daylight. He looked at the crowd, his people. "For 10 years, he said, his voice raw, "I have operated in the shadows my father left me, no more." He turned to the dock workers, to the families. "The Morello name is tied to this harbor. If you want me to leave, I will leave. Tell me to go, and I am gone." It was quiet. You could hear the water lapping at the pier outside. Maria from the union office stepped out of the crowd. "We are tired of ghosts. "Morello," she said, her voice sharp. "We are tired of shadows. We don't want you to go." She pointed, not at him, but at the daylight streaming in from the open roof. "We want you to stay, but you stay here, in the light, with us." A single person, Old Man Hemlock, began to clap, a slow, solid beat. Then Maria, then the entire warehouse erupted. It wasn't cheering. It was a rhythmic, powerful applause. 1,000 people, stamping their feet, clapping their hands. "Stay, in the light, stay, in the light." It was a new contract, forged in front of everyone. The noise, the emotion, the sudden, overwhelming relief. It was too much. The adrenaline that had held me up for days, for what felt like a lifetime, finally drained away. My vision tunneled, the floor tilted, the lights blurring into bright, swimming comets. I stumbled. "Lena?" I didn't fall, and he was there. Before I could take a second step, Cassian had me, his arm wrapped around my waist like a steel band, pulling me tight against his side. His other hand cupped the back of my head, pushing my face into his shoulder, holding me steady, holding me up. "I've got you," he whispered, his voice low. "For me and me alone. You're okay. I've got you." I clung to his suit, my legs shaking, my head swimming. I could feel his heart, a steady, powerful, living beat beneath my ear. "Cassian," I whispered, the name a sigh. He just held me tighter. "I know," he murmured. He pulled back just enough to look at me, a real, tired, devastating smile touching his lips. "I still owe you that peach pie." Ira walked over, his cane tapping. He looked at us, his old, cloudy eyes clear and sharp. He saw his son, holding me, not as a possession, but as an anchor. He saw us. He nodded, a slow, deep nod, like an old ship finally, after a long, terrible voyage, settling into its berth. He reached out his one good, trembling hand. He placed it on mine, where it was fisted in Cassian's suit. "Her anchor," Ira whispered, looking at his son. "And yours." That night, the warehouse was quiet. The police had come and gone, taking Quill and Auric into a storm of flashbulbs. The Bay Pulse feed was the #1 story in the city. We weren't at a diner. We were sitting on the roof of a shipping container, our legs dangling, overlooking the dark, quiet water of the harbor. The city lights were a smear of color, like a different, gentler city. Cassian came back, holding 2 cardboard containers. The steam rose from them, smelling of cinnamon and baked apples. It was hot peach pie from the all-night place on Pratt Street. We ate with cheap plastic forks, the silence comfortable, the air cold and clean. When we were done, he took the empty containers from me. He looked at me, his gray eyes soft in the moonlight. "You, Lena Hart," he said, his voice quiet, "are a terrifying force of nature." "I just fed an old man," I whispered. "You fed us all," he said. He leaned in. This kiss wasn't the frantic treaty in the rain. It wasn't the desperate, breathless kiss in the dark room. This was slow. It was warm. It was safe. It tasted of peaches and promises kept. His hand came up to cup my jaw, his thumb brushing my cheek, and it lasted a long, long time. He didn't just stay. He tore down the empire of shadows. He rebuilt it as the Harbor Trust, a real community trust, run by the unions, by the dock workers. He put Spectre Wire under their control, a tool to protect them, not a weapon to rule them. And me, I still work at the Harbor and Grit, but I bought the space next door. I opened the night kitchen, a place for the graveyard shift, for the kips, for the people who work in the dark, a place for a hot meal. Ira sits at the counter, his hands steadier now, telling stories of ships as long as a lifetime. Cassian and I, we walk the docks together. We walk under the lights. He kept his promise. Power, he learned, has to be seen, and so, he learned, does love. Thank you so much for listening to our story. We would love to hear your thoughts. Where in the world are you listening from? Let us know in the comments below so we can connect. Please subscribe to Mafia Boss Stories, like this video, And if you enjoyed it, please support us by hitting that hype button to help this story be heard by more people.